Hi, everybody. I'm Sara Christiansen. I am a strategic HR executive, an author, and a consultant. And I have been in the HR space for over 25 years. And I've been listening to conversations over the last month or so about DEI. And some of the things have been really surprising me. So I felt compelled to reach out to a dear friend of mine, Cecile Maino, and really start a frank conversation around this hot topic. So let me kind of set the stage for you. Cecile and I met a few years ago when she was the VP of Human Resources at MGM Resorts, and she was kind of the head over all of the HR operations for the Vegas properties. And she was really instrumental in leading the rebranding of Park MGM and the Monte Carlo. And I had met her soon after she'd finished that work, so she had a lot of really great stories. But I was doing some training with the HR team there and got to know Cecile pretty well over a couple glasses of wine and learned about her real passion for DEI, not just at work, not just in her HR role, but in her life. And so when I started to hear things in the media around a DEI hire and that having a negative connotation, I knew that Cecile would have some really strong thoughts on the subject. So I want to talk to her today and get her insights and maybe share some of mine as well. So Cecile, I know that you're doing some premier executive coaching right now for your new company called Cadillac Consulting. Have you interacted with any leaders recently on the topic of DEI?
Yes, interesting topic, and thank you for inviting me, by the way. It's lovely to see you
Sure.
and see you're doing well. Yes, it's always a subject that comes up whenever I'm coaching a leader because you can't help for it to come up because we're all humans. Humans have impacts. Humans carry impacts, and the impacts that we try to make on others. The subject always comes up about difference, about inclusion, about how do I navigate. And so these are some of the, particularly in the season that we're in, one of the young men that I coached here recently, who's not quite young, he's 60 years old, African American gentleman, and he himself had still been challenged with the ability to be seen, the ability to be included in opinion, being brought into the conversation, if you will. And so part of the coaching that he was reaching out to me for was how do I do that without being seen as aggressive, quote unquote? How do I do that without being labeled as, all of those typical biases and stereotypes that African American men can be labeled when they want to speak their mind. And so we got into deep conversations about that, but I did realize that it is still out there. It's a big issue and a concern that can't be lost in the conversation. Still needs to be present.
Yeah, one of the things that has shocked me is, in our 25 plus years between us in HR, we've always focused on limiting, um, you know, any type of discrimination, really providing inclusive environments. And all of a sudden, I feel like that work has been hijacked. And when you hear the term DEI hire, which for us used to be really a lofty goal and a good thing in our workplaces, now it's being presented with a negative connotation. Where do you think that comes from?
You know, if I'm going to be frank, I do think in the last few years it's turned to a political discussion rather than one of the original intent, which was about creating a space for equality, creating a space where diversity can thrive and energize an organization. It's now become politicized, but politicized in a way that people who are afraid or have fear about being excluded then also don't know how to jump in and be included. And they then in turn, particularly if you are not uh, used to being marginalized, let's just take that step. if I am a white male or a white, even, female, the fact that they turn the language and the thought process to make me believe I am being marginalized, when in fact I'm not. But there's a lot of language and rhetoric that's turning in that direction. And when people do not do their own research, or they just don't know any better, and they're starting to feel that pressure or that stress, then pressure and that stress become reality for them. And that's where rhetoric can be damaging, and where rhetoric can be taken in the wrong context. And so it's important for leaders of people, for HR leaders of people, for executives in organizations, not even in just HR, but executives across organizations. They have to stop and recognize, what are the words I'm choosing to use to describe how I feel? What are the words that we as an organization are choosing to label people as, or causes for, or beliefs of, because they are being misinterpreted without further explanation. And I think that that's a part of what's happening to the DEI initiatives, is that they're becoming muddled into other fears, other stressors that are out there, and other belief systems that, in and of themselves threaten the very basis of what the work is supposed to be about.
That's excellent insight. When you and I first met, it was recently after the George Floyd situation, and I'm from Minnesota, so it was really a part of my daily conversations. And one of the things that happened soon after that was large corporations were putting out messages that were from the executive voice. For example, Best Buy, their entire executive team put out a joint message. And I saw for the first time organizations really willing to have those frank conversations. Do you think we're going to continue in that direction, or do you think we're going to kind of go backwards? What's the business case for having those conversations?
Well, two questions are in there that I hear, and the first is, do I think we're going backwards? I think that there's studies that are indicating that 20% of companies now have dropped their DE&I initiatives. The state of Florida, many companies, I'm reading now that their law has been passed to stop DE&I initiatives because they believe they have some biases. They're terminating their DE&I VPs and officers, and yet you also have other companies that still, believe in the process, believe in programs. But I think that the crux for me, Sarah, is that if companies want to succeed, they need to have DE&I initiatives, but not apart and in themselves, this little pillar of its own program. It's got to be intertwined as a part of your overall business strategy. And it has to have many layers within that strategy. So many companies start off by, well, we're going to elect this DE&I officer, and he or she are going to go in and they're going to create, some great training and things for leaders to learn. But all of that does not mean a thing to the business at whole if it's not intertwined in how you think about how you earn your money, ethically, with integrity, how you hire with ethics, integrity, and equality. Those things get lost. And so you just can't wordsmith it. It has to be an ingrained part of your organization's baseline culture, belief system, and strategy for business. And I think that's where companies are trying to move, but it's difficult in this day and time with the political noise that's going on and the pressures that come to CEOs and boards. Because boards are about Wall Street. They're not about, at the end of the day. And Wall Street also has, political pressures. And so it's difficult now more than ever to navigate. And so you need strong voices within that organization, particularly with your CEO, your COOs of the company, not just your HR people, to make sure that this becomes entwined in your strategy of business.
Cecile, what has been your experience as a female executive? Because I look at, this past year, especially in women's athletics, things have really changed. Watching the Olympics, and for the first time, 50% of the Olympians are women. And so with the conversations happening in the media about DEI hires, they're referring to women. Have you felt that in your career?
And just
Well,
real quick, we're at the 10-minute mark. Continue.
I've
Okay,
been
thank you.
on I've been on a path of career for like you, Sarah, for 25 years. So um, the answer is absolutely yes. I've felt the pressures of being excluded early on, particularly in my career starting in Detroit and automotive. That was a man's environment. And I think that at the end of the day, as I look forward to today, some things have changed, but some things are still the same. I think what's changing is uh, a woman's take on how she receives the negativity, um, and how we become stronger because we know how to do it now. We've been in this game for a while. We know the language, we know the terms, we know the biases, and particularly in my line of coaching, where I specialize in female executives, it's to help them find that voice that says, "I'm not going to do it to me anymore." And what does that look like that allows me still a foot at the table, or a seat at the table and a foot in the door? Because there's ways that we have to maneuver, still, unfortunately, but maneuver. Don't lose that strength. Don't lose that voice. Become a champion of those who can't champion themselves. Women are excellent at that because we're familiar with that. And we know how to identify those biases a lot quicker uh, by sheer essence of where we've been in our own environments. And I'm not negating that men do not know how to do the same. Women have just learned by the natural instinct of being a minority, just as other minority cultures recognize biases that we may not. I often, when coaching this individual, I just finished my coaching on, and he still calls me. He says, I need your female voice in my head, just as at times you need my black man voice in your head, so that we understand what each other is thinking and feeling. Because trust me, I'm not a black man. I've never walked in those shoes. So I think for women, as we become comfortable in that strength and discomfort, it makes some others uncomfortable. Well, I'm okay with that because the times are a changing. They need to. They need to continue to progress. And there are a lot of voices out there that are still not being heard. So don't count on me of weakening down.
Well, I really appreciate your point of view, Cecile. One of the things I always say is comfort is not the girl, growth is. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your insights. I know that we'll continue to have this conversation many more times. Hopefully, we'll be able to connect and continue to have a frank discussion. If anyone is interested in exploring this further, I'm planning on having a webinar in August on some of the practices that you can put into play, and we'll utilize some of the insights that Cecile has provided. Stay tuned for further information on that. And if you have any strong feelings about what we're talking about, please feel free to leave a note. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Cecile. It's a pleasure having you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Keep fighting the fight, Sarah.